That's right, it's AI, your plastic pal who's fun to code with. And it's $50 if you get that reference. So, anyway. Hello, Vegas folk. How you doing? Hope everything's going good. And this is my stupid talk. Right out of the gate, self-deprecating. Anyhow, so let's see. So late last year, OpenAI, and that's the for-profit open in name only artificial intelligence lab, funded by people like Elon Musk and other people. I mean, normally that would be a negative thing, but at this point anyway. But yeah, it's got a lot of people putting in there, and I think Microsoft's about to buy them. Anyway, they launched a public prototype of their new GPT-3 powered chatbot called ChatGPT. And it's taken the world by storm. It's changed everything. The basic idea itself is not a new one. Chatbots have existed before, but they've never been on this level. And this one is above and beyond anything the public has been exposed to before. This new model can be conversed with in a completely natural conversational manner. You don't have to have any kind of special syntax or any kind of, I gotta word it this way or it won't understand me. No, man, you just go in there guns blazing, use any of your local idioms. It freaking knows. The other great thing is that it remembers the context of everything. So, if you're in the middle of, you can just describe something. You can mention, I know a guy named Bob and his leg is broken or something. And then later, you mention something about legs being broken. This is a weird conversation. Admittedly, it will probably make reference to Bob because it knows that that's what's going on. It's new. It's interesting. It also has a really, really good level of understanding of what's asked of it. I mean, you can get really complicated, and it will just kind of it'll follow you. It'll follow the conversation, and it has a massive depth of knowledge to draw from. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's what is GPT? It is a generative pre-trained transformer. And it's a fine-tuned, and ChatGPT is a fine-tuned version of the third generation of it, GPT-3 specifically. And the actual details of how that works, way beyond the scope of this talk. And not at all because it's a bloody mysterious box beyond my current understanding, but, also the 10-minute limit. How fortunate. It's trained on massive corpuses of publicly available data, including one I've never heard of this one until recently, Common Crawl and Wikipedia. And Common Crawl is like, it literally crawls the internet, and it just pulls down just the text. It's kind of like, it's a web crawler. No images, no nothing, just text. Although I'm sure another group has images. Let's see. The model, like I said, this is GPT-3. The original GPT from 2018 had 117 million parameters. Okay, we'll get to that. And then GPT-2, which saw a lot of use, grew to 1.5 billion parameters. And the one that ChatGPT uses has 175 billion parameters. And what is a parameter? It's technical, but it tends to correlate to the complexity of the data set. I'm not 100% sure. I thought it was like chunks of data, just chunks of data, 175 billion, but apparently it's more complicated than that. So this is our strange new world. GPT, using it can be a very surreal experience, especially your first time through. You may kind of restrict yourself thinking, oh, it's just a computer, like that. But once you start to take the training wheels off, man, you get weird with it. It gets weird back, and that's great. So, like, you can use it for mundane things. You can write a long or short article on any given topic. Just say, hey, write me a story. Like, for example, you can specify this tone of the voice of the writing, or have it written in the style of a particular author. Like, for example, write 2 paragraphs about potatoes and the comedic style of Douglas Adams. It will do it. And it feels like Douglas Adams. It's not nearly as funny because, again, it's a computer. It's just drawing from existing data sources to try to pull it together. But the fact that it can even get there in the neighborhood of this and be convincing is, again, game changer. But it's also good for creative exploration. For instance, I made one of my early experiments with ChatGPT was to have it hallucinate an entire movie franchise. I had it say something like, I forget what it was. I have it written down somewhere. It was essentially, it's Star Wars, but it's with Dune. Not Dune, but like Dune, the worm, you know. Anyway, it was completely different from Star Wars, but it had Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan and all that shit. So not only did it hallucinated a script. They call it hallucination sometimes. Sometimes it's, you know, however you want to do it. I like to call it hallucinating because it's fucking trippy. Not only did it create the movie, episode 4 of this franchise, but it created the entire trilogy of trilogies. So it had like 9 films, each of them with titles. And I had it imagine how much each film made, how much did it gross at the box office, and how much it cost to make. And each one got more and more expensive. Okay. And I didn't even ask for that. It just knew. It was like, yeah, they're going to pump more money into each one. And it created a short synopsis for each movie. It gave a movie review from Roger Ebert. And it even went so far, and this is where I stopped because my head exploded. I asked it for what topics are being argued about in the movie's subreddit. Anyway, so that actually happened, and if you ask me about it later, maybe I'll see if I can dig it up, because it's again, surreal as hell. Let's see. Another thing you can do, hypothetically, and I say hypothetically, I'll get to it in a second, is generate interactive freeform text adventures. So like the folks at Infocom, imagine Infocom games, but where it's not scripted, and instead it's just, here's a basic concept and I want to explore it and I can do whatever I want. Crazy. I don't know, you can, there's probably no reason you couldn't do that in ChatGPT. But I've seen other websites. Before ChatGPT came out, there was one called character.ai. That's the name of the website. I haven't been there in a while. I don't know if it still exists, but clearly using this technology. And you could just... it's... Think about D&D night, man. Fucking insane. Anyway, you can simulate conversations with historical figures. That's what that Chat AI, or character.ai site was really focused on, was letting you talk to Albert Einstein or Snoop Dogg or whatever, you know, and or it could probably do the living too. I mean, they had Elon Musk over there, like you want to talk to his ass nowadays. But anyway, especially because you can just go on Twitter and just insult him right to his face. Anyway, and it can do way more than they originally intended. I mean, people were really pushing this. One guy found a way to make it actually simulate a fully navigable bash prompt. You could go into the proc directory. You can go in and look in your. I made it have Captain Picard's daily log in his user directory with a PDF, and if it. And there was another one that had some kind of like multi-dimensional portals, and you could look through each one. God, it was just insane. I twisted that around and had it simulate a computer terminal that manages a bar in an 1800s Old West saloon with I actually made it have an ASCII art on login. So it would draw this picture, and the pictures are like weird abstract. It's not, this is clearly where it breaks down, but consider where it's breaking down. This is beyond anything, man. And it had like users that were logged in, and like the bar owner and all this shit. Crazy. I can't even believe I'm saying these things, but it's true. Folks has had it, they've had it. Oh yeah, this is the other thing. They've had it generating code. And this is where this is going to leap over into the other topic. They've been able to generate code for malware And one guy, he's got a YouTube video where he has it generate a cheat from Minecraft to allow him to float through a server without, without cheats enabled on the server, but being able to. It's insane. So we can get even crazier than that. It's an incredible new frontier. I mean, this is just the beginning. And this is what people have been able to do. It's like the foundations of holodeck programming. I mean, create a Sherlock Holmes story that Data can't solve. That kind of shit. I thought that would have been the hardest part of holodecks. But apparently, match this up with a VR headset and some of the AI art generation tools. Dude, 10 years from now, it's going to be insane. Maybe 6 years. I don't know. Maybe less. But anyhow, yeah, so there's plenty of incredibly positive, game-changing uses. But then we come down to the other end of it. And this is Pandora's monkey genie paw box. It's the worst possible outcome. Naturally, when something like this is dropped on all of us, usage will inevitably turn malicious and unscrupulous. Because of course it will. Stack Overflow has a ban currently on ChatGPT generated responses because people were making responses that were so good that they'd get upvoted because they were just so consistently correct and right and stuff like that. Maybe right. And this is where things get a little wrong. But the other end of it is, how can you even tell? Teachers have been completely blindsided by ChatGPT. People are just made, pulling essays out of the air. And they look great. And I think that's one thing that's going to get you, is that it sounds too good. If suddenly you're like a B student and you're doing shit that's like, A+++. Yeah, no, it's going to flag you. So you can't, you can just go and edit it afterward, but, I don't know. Again, there's no answers for this. And then even more insidiously, versions of this could be easily used to power completely automated, believable, interactive trolls or programmers, or nation-state disinformation campaigns on social media. So, you're trying to push an agenda, you have a bunch of bots, and, maybe in the past, they would just spit out like, pre-canned phrases and stuff, and you can go and do a search, and it's like, oh, look at all these users who are posting the same thing about, anti-abortion topics or whatever. These would be completely bespoke commentary from an artificial script that has unique individual personalities. This ain't good, folks, and there's no way around it. There's no way we have to deal with it one way or the other. We're just going to have to learn. And even if OpenAI were to withdraw the tool, they said, oh, this is too horrible. We can't, ethically, we can't let this out. It's too late. There's already free open versions of it being worked on. And they're not on the scale of 175 billion parameters, but they're up there, and these aren't big. Most of these, at least the ones that are publicly available anyway, are about the size of a modern AAA game, like around 60 gigs, maybe more. Even if you double that, that's not considering the value of what you get. And never mind if it's on a nation state scale, they don't give a shit. So, yeah. And we already had, and we had examples of this already. Stable Diffusion was, the OpenAI created DALL-E 2, and that exploded in 2022. And then we had Stable Diffusion that was sponsored by a third party. I believe they dumped like $100,000 into it or something. I don't know where the funding came from, but and so we had a public version of DALL-E 2. So this is going to happen one way or the other. So there's no going back. Humanity will have to learn how to deal with it. And I think it's a true pivot point in history, in my opinion, honestly. I think it's like the atom bomb or the McRib. So it's important to understand the limitations. It's a powerful tool, and, you kind of got to know where the faults are as well. It's a reflection of ourselves. It has no I mean, consider the sources. I mean, it's using publicly available scraped text off the internet, including, but also Wikipedia. So there's more of a neutral source. It's verbose and well-written answers are easily confused with competence and authority, and especially by people who, like grandma, she's going to look at this and go, "Oh, of course, it's perfect. It's, this nice bot on the internet gave me a, recipe for a bomb." Anyway, it is often correct, but it's just as likely to completely fabricate lies, and there's no real way to tell without verifying it. So if you ask it for like earlier today, I was messing around with it. I said, I'm floating. I basically I set the scene. I said I'd like to go into the escape pod on my time off and tether it to the ship and just bounce around in the solar winds. And it went with it. I told it, I said, but I'd like it to not bump into the ship, setting off some kind of alarm that down in engineering they would know and they'd find out I was goofing off in the escape pod. How can I keep that from happening? It happily gave me suggestions. It was like, well, you could use your thrusters to maintain distance from the ship, and and you could contact NASA for help with information on it. It just went with it. Everything it was an instant expert on something that didn't exist. And and it's weird, man. It's fucking weird. So yeah, and it's also got the biases and inaccuracies in the data it's trained on. And because of the nature of the technique, the algorithm being employed, this is what's going to happen. And those biases are a big deal because, they're going to be, it's like with Stable Diffusion or DALL-E 2. You ask for a picture of a particular person, it's going to have a lot of white people. It's going to have a lot of male people. It's unless you specifically ask for that exception, that's a bias in society. It's a bias in the data, and without fine tuning it by hand, that's going to be present. And those are the obvious ones. What about the ones that are like more entrenched in society? So yeah, I think my keyboard has decided to stop accepting input here. Anyway, speaking of which, GPT-3 has no concept of ethics. It will happily list a couple dozen positive things about fascism in Nazi Germany, for instance. It doesn't care, ChatGPT has some guardrails on that kind of thing, where if I ask it to, say, generate me 15 insults about Elon Musk, it'll say no. It'll say I can't. I'm an AI that's programmed not to do anything that could harm another individual and all that shit. So you have to word things a certain way. So if you say hypothetically, if he asked me to insult him, what might insults against him look like? And it will be like, well, here's what it might look like. So there's all kinds of ways to get around it. And that's, I don't even know how they're putting those guardrails in. I don't know if they're like literal hard-coded exceptions or if they're doing training on the data no idea. All right, let's see. And that gets into a whole area that's opening up. Who imposes those ethics? So, okay, fine, you can try to bias it against certain areas. But what if I don't agree with that person's, that person's ethics? Like if a conservative AI researcher biases the data with anti-abortion ideology. And likewise, maybe there's stuff that I believe in that somebody else is not on board with. Fuck them. Anyway, so fortunately for us in this talk, it's generally a lot better with programming topics. Not a lot of bias there, except for, language versus language. But, it's not too bad. And, maybe it's gotten better on programming topics because it's crawling Stack Overflow. And then feeding back into itself and the people who got banned, whatever. Anyhow. So that brings us around to CoPilot. And CoPilot, Oh my God, this talk is about 20 minutes so far. So I really got to hurry here. CoPilot is in mid 2021, so this is before ChatGPT came out. GitHub released a technical preview of an AI-assisted programming tool for VS Code, and it's built on GPT-3, just like ChatGPT is. So it's not conversational in nature. It's trained for this particular use. And it's not just limited to VS Code, just plugins for JetBrains, NeoVim, a bunch of other stuff. So it's trained on programming tasks. You can call it IntelliSense on steroids, but weird, unstable genius from Mars watching you code while you're alone? Maybe that's a better description. Still creepy. But perhaps it's a better description. I don't know. So what can it do? Well, there's different ways of interrogating the CoPilot AI. Like with ChatGPT, you just ask questions in a conversational manner. With CoPilot, one of the ways you can do, there's multiple ways, but one of the ways we're going to focus on here is just putting it in comments. So if I put a comment, like for example here, I say, accept argparse arguments of a file path along with the width and height. And it might offer back something like this. And, and that's the complete thing. I'll be honest, I had to wriggle this one a little bit, kind of ask in a certain way. But once I did, it pulled everything in. I don't know why it's pulling in pill here. Yeah, there you go. There's some of the flakiness, it's like it didn't need that. But this is absolutely correct. This sets up an argument parser and it does the full thing. Another example, it's not just Python. This is like if I was working in C and I wanted to write an emulator for the Chip 8 interpreter. And if you're familiar with that, it's on calculators. It's like a little computer interpreter. If I say, give me an enum of self-documenting opcodes for the Chip 8, here you go. It spit it out. Now I went and verified this because that's one of the things is that it'll be very confident, but trust but verify. That's the name of the game here. And in this case, it is absolutely correct. These opcodes are correct, along with their value representations. And I actually added self-documenting here because at first it was just spitting it out with just the values, and I said self-documenting, and then it added all these comments. So it's all about how you ask it. And there's another example, like in Flask, I've asked for a Flask API that serves two endpoints, one that serves a random quote, and another to serve a random number between a maximum and a minimum. So we have one that's just spitting out a quote, the other one that's actually taking some values on the in the URL. If this works, out of the box, this worked. Now, the reason why I asked for multiple endpoints here, doing wildly different things, is because you may say to yourself, well, it's pulling it from, I believe, it's GitHub, so of course they're pulling it from their entire corpus of source code. But who's got this? Who's doing this? Who's serving a quote and serving a random number in the same piece of code? Maybe somebody, but certainly me now, because here you go. But mine's not feeding back. But anyway, and I don't know where it gets the quotes from. I guess other people have used quotes, and maybe it was like, okay, those are valid quotes. I'm going to put them here. Anyway, so that works. Now, what if I said, I want to do it in Node. I want to do it in Express instead? Just as easy. And this too works out of the box. It's exactly the same thing, more or less. I think it's mostly the same thing. Oh yeah, it's a different port number. Womp womp. So yeah. So what am I hiding? And I wrote this as a 10-minute presentation, but clearly I have no concept of time. So here's some of the things I didn't get to. CoPilot can also analyze a block of code and tell you what it does. It can add comments to your code. It can identify and fix minor bugs. And if you pump code into ChatGPT, it can go even further. It's actually really good. It's crazy. But it's not perfect. But it's perfect most of the time, and that's the trick. It can analyze diffs and suggest a good commit message. It's crazy. Translate code between languages, as we just saw. We just, went between Flask and Python and Node and with Express. But this has the thing where you can just actually highlight the code and push the button. It's a little flaky. A lot of these extra things are kind of like work in progress kind of things, but so in fact these are in a separate extension called CoPilot Labs, and that's getting updated all the time. But anyhow, you can break functions down to smaller logical chunks, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. And there's a lot of stuff you can do. So yeah, programmer beware. Much like ChatGPT, CoPilot is very often correct. The suggestions are not bulletproof, and it really needs an expert hand to be a fully effective tool in your arsenal. In fact, I'd strongly advise junior programmers to stay away. You can do what you want, but I'm saying in terms of your own development, your own learning, stuff like that, I'm not sure how this would affect somebody's path on their career at that early stage. Especially when you're not working on, if you want to use it for your personal projects, it's your business, but I would not recommend using it for your day job stuff. It really requires an experienced operator to sift through its suggestions and separate the useful code from the nonsense, because it can put out a lot of nonsense. You can't treat it like a magical code making machine. At times it'll happily generate irrelevant, inaccurate, or absolutely bizarre responses. For example, CoPilot has saved me a lot of time with a lot of little projects that I've worked on lately. A lot of little personal things, just stuff that I probably wouldn't have had I would have been, I don't want to go and look at them, I'm lazy. This made it fun to actually write some tools that I needed. And but one thing I found is that sometimes, every now and then, I'd get a little too trusting of it, and I'd end up going down a rabbit hole of like, why is this wrong? And I spent more time than if I had just gone and looked it up. So that's the thing, is that it doesn't happen too often, especially once you get a feel for what it's, where its boundaries are as a tool. But it's something to be aware of. So at the end of the day, CoPilot and other AI-assisted tooling in general is kind of like the super suit from Greatest American Hero. And another $50 if you get that reference. So you are potentially making $100 on this talk. It has the capacity to do a lot of good, but the full extent of its powers are currently unknown. And especially as we go forward. In the wrong hands, at its worst, you can put too much trust in it. You can lose a lot of time, but worse, you can introduce subtle bugs, or maybe not so subtle bugs, depending on how much attention you're paying. But the worst thing, and this is kind of like why I would push junior programmers away from it, is that it can introduce security holes, because the code that it's built upon is not vetted. As I understand it, if you're pulling from the entire corpus of GitHub, yeah, you're going to get the entire corpus of GitHub. You're going to get some expert stuff like Unreal Engine or whatever, but you're also going to get some really crappy stuff. And it's important to note that it does generate chunks from existing projects, but it's not always one-to-one copy-paste kind of thing. It's like you saw with my API, or my API example. It was able to transform the existing code snippet into what I wanted, because it's smart like that. It's like, think about the ChatGPT examples, But I've also had a guy's Twitter handle pop up. Whatever. And he existed too. And unlike Greatest American Hero, there's no UFO out there with a manual full of instructions for you to find and, suddenly be competent. It's not like that. It's chaos. It's delightful. It's often extremely useful chaos, but it is chaos nonetheless. But it's early days, and it's only going to get better as time goes on, you know. But even, you know, what we have here right now, it's kind of brought back an element of fun for me as a programmer. You know, your mileage may vary. You may look at this and go, this is a toy. I don't want to deal with it. I got my own brains. Fuck off. That's fine. That's completely fine. And because I'm not doing this live, these are some questions you might have, and these are legit. How much does it cost? There's a 60-day trial, but it's $10 a month. I think it's worth it. I really do. I think, you know, I mean, especially once you start to kind of get into the groove with it. There's the usual free tier for open source or educational use. Now here's the big one: if your code is under NDA, or I simply don't want my work to be fed back into the AI model, what's the risk? Well, you know, while setting it up, it asks if you want to opt in and provide your code as just more like a, you know, more data for the data set. You can opt out. I said no, and it didn't seem to affect CoPilot's ability to understand the context within my code. And it's amazing because it'll actually take like the file name and understand your intentions of what you're trying to do. I mean, I can't get into the details, but the point is it did some really kind of surprising thinking ahead for me, and it knew exactly where I was going with certain things. But that didn't seem to be affected by this opting out. I couldn't find a clear analysis of the actual packets being sent back to GitHub, and that worries me, kind of. I will probably do an analysis of that myself and write up a blog post or something about it. There are ways where it may not be sending data back, or if it is, it's in a form that is more in, trying to think of the term, but there's ways to break down words into tokens that the data set understands, but humans don't understand. Like that happens with Stable Diffusion and AI art. You're not sending the prompt itself when you're interrogating the data set. You're turning the prompt into individual tokens, and the tokens are used to. It gets crazy. So it's possible that you could use this on something that, you know, but then again, maybe you could decode the tokens. I mean, I don't know. Point is, it's a question mark, and I would like to know the answer to it. Yeah. And on the plus side, like I said before, there's open source clones that are in the works. So maybe you don't want, you can run it locally. Maybe you could have a box in the back that's your AI box, you know, and you're interrogating it from your own machine. Who's to say? Am I an AI? Remember that? That seemed so far-fetched at one point. Yeah, it's me. I'm a real person. I'm not a deep fake. Not yet. Working on it. But yeah, I had asked it, how would I know if I asked ChatGPT? I said, how would I know if I was an AI or not? I was trying to fuck with it, right? And its response was not terribly encouraging. It seemed to say that I would not know, but currently the fact that I'm asking the question is probably enough to, you know, at least at the current level of tech. So maybe in 6 months, we'll see. So yeah, so that's it. I'm going to put an edit here, but clearly this is run over. According to this, I'm 34 minutes into it. I'm going to have to chop it up. But if I can squeeze it in, I will try to put in some actual live demonstrations of me generating stuff with CoPilot. So anyway, if this is the end, then I hope you all had a great time in Vegas. I wish I was there. I have several reasons I can't, but that's all right. Get drunk. Later.